Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don Pizzette, back again with another episode of CompTIA IT Fundamentals. And in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at, well, actually following up, taking a look at connection types and services. In part one, we had a chance to learn about some of the different options that were out there and the different flavors of network connectivity. Well, there's a ton of them, so we're continuing on. And just like last time, I've got Mr. Ronnie Wong right here in the studio here to help walk us through the process. Ronnie, thank you for joining us.
Well, Don, thank you for having me back as we continue on to take a look at this idea of these service types that are available. Most of us may not have even heard that term before, Don, the idea of service types, but you've probably heard the term broadband connections. And if you've watched TV at all, if you've been browsing, you hear everybody competing for broadband access, something like that. And that's what we're talking about, is for us to be able to connect out to the internet somewhere. There's different types of technologies that we want to be familiar with. And of course, if you're going to enter the IT world, you should know a little bit about them as well. So we're going to address, of course, some of the different ones that are out there, such as dial-up. I know you might go, dial-up, are you sure? Yeah, we're going to talk about that just briefly. But of course, the more popular ones like DSL and cable, even satellite that's also out there. And then the newer ones that you might not have heard of a little bit more about, such as the fixed wireless connections. And of course, probably the most popular one today is going to be some type of cellular type of connection too. So we'll be diving in those technologies, trying to give you an introduction to what those things are, about, and how do we normally see them connected.
All right, now, Ronnie, this is a topic that's important to businesses as well as individuals, right? If you're going to open up a business, you likely need internet connectivity. You do email or place orders, run a website. As an individual, we pretty much expect internet access because we stream videos, send email, do a lot of the same things that companies do, just on a personal level. Well, in this technology day and age, we have a lot of choices. Well, I shouldn't say that because not everybody has a lot of choices. You'll talk about that later. But most of us, if you move into a new home or you rent an apartment, you have choices. And it's confusing. A lot of these, they don't really explain very well what the difference is between like DSL and cable or even that term broadband.
Right.
Like, what does that even mean? Because not everything is considered broadband. So Ronnie, can you help kind of shed some light on this? Like, what are some of the difference between all these different technologies?
Yeah, when it comes down to the different types of technologies, there are different connection types that we have, and some of them require, at least at the very beginning, right, that you had to make a connection, such as dialing up on a telephone and then the other side had to answer. But some of them, you just call up the service provider and you wait. You may wait a day, you may wait 4 days for all you know, and they go ahead and get everything set up. And from that point, you're just plugging a cable into your machine and you've got internet access, and then you're ready to go and you're very happy to be able to do that. Other ones may come in and even put in additional equipment that's outside of your home that allow you to also connect, and then additional equipment inside of your home too that will make sure that you can connect overall. But Don, you're right. The idea of that term broadband is kind of a little bit confusing for most people. So when we start to talk about it, most of the time, at least when we're talking about connecting out to the internet, into that network, we're normally going to kind of equate those to some of the ones that we've been talking about here, such as cable internet access and DSL and satellite connections. All these are considered broadband types, and that means that multiple signals multiple signals can use that same technology at the same time to be able to connect and get access to the internet too. So that's where, if you get more technical, there's of course more to that, but at the same time, that's probably how we tend to use it more often than not when we start doing it. Also, of course, as we get into it, you do have to actually think about and consider some of the technology depending on the region that you're in, because like Don said, you may find out you only have really one or two options, or maybe even usually at least two options today. But at one point, there used to only be one option. Now, Don, you remember the days of one option, right?
Yeah, when I got my first internet connection, it was a dial-up service. And you mentioned how setup was a trick. You had to do a setup. The setup was really hard. This would have been in like the early 1990s. And going through that setup process was a nightmare. There was one company that really jumped out there and made that process easy, which was a company called AOL. And there were other ones like CompuServe, and AT&T had Genie, where they would mail you a CD and you just pop it in your computer and installs their software and it makes that dial-up system easy. But that was the original connection type because everybody had a phone line, right? So everybody could potentially be a customer.
And that's actually kind of the important aspect of this too, is that if you have a phone line, a landline today, you probably can still get connected to the internet. Now, just when I say that, we were talking about this right before the show. I think even the largest provider at one point that was called AOL, America Online, that they may have already dropped their particular dial-up service that allowed you to connect. But at one point, that's all that you did. Let's take a look at my screen so that we can see a little bit of a diagram here. Now, I just wanted to add this in because it's the way that I began, and the idea here of understanding how the internet connection worked it was this too. Okay, we have an existing structure, which of course is going to be our publicly switched telephone network. Okay, so your telephone company, they have all the lines everywhere that you want to go, and if you wanted to connect to the internet, it was simple. You had a modem that either you bought that was either a separate device, like I have it shown here, and then you had to connect that to your computer as well. And then once you actually did that, then you also had the other connection that went out to the telephone line too. Now the connection on this end over here, this could have been a serial connection over here. If I remember correctly, I think it was a serial connection or even a parallel port connection, but usually it was a serial connection, which meant that there were these kind of bigger plugs that had multiple pins in them, and you connected that to the back of the computer and had to kind of tighten them down by their own set screws. But once that was done, you used the software, and the software was pre-programmed to dial a specific number. And when you heard that, you heard this kind of scratchy signal, and then you heard a kind of little jingle. And what that actually allowed us to do was to connect over to another device on the other end. Now, what we're talking about here are these devices that are called modems. Okay, a modem stands for modulator demodulator, and the only thing that the modem really did is it took the signal that was on my end coming out of my computer, that was strictly a digital signal, and allowed it to, well, go on to that telephone network signal or that line. And that was because all the signal on the telephone lines were analog. I can't send a digital signal across an analog line for too long. Okay, it's just not going to let me. It might get it out there, but it's not going to go very far. But in the analog signal, it actually allows us to carry that along here. And so the modem helped us to translate that. And then at the other end, it would again take whatever that analog signal ended up translating into and then converting it back to whatever we were trying to reach, such as AOL or CompuServe like we were talking about. And then we would browse their services that they had available to us. So this was kind of the earliest connections that we had. Now, its benefit, of course, is that it was fairly universal. Okay? The very fact that you had a telephone, you had a connection, it was great. But the problem that I also had, Don, I don't know if you experienced this, is when somebody would try to call me, okay, and I was using the telephone line, and they would pick up and call me like, your line's always busy. Well, I was on the actual modem at that point, connecting and connecting out to the services that were provided to me, and I didn't think about that. So that's when my world of technology expanded, Don, and I had to go to a pager. I know Don remembers the idea of pagers here, so that people could reach me because I was actually connected to the internet by using the telephone line.
Yeah, and that telephone line, it was a blessing and a curse at the same time, right? So on one hand, everybody already had a phone line run into their home. Here in the United States, a landline is pretty ubiquitous, right? But that meant that your data communication, which is going over a line designed to carry voices, is now carrying data in the form of sound. If you've ever heard that modem screeching sound, it's transmitting that way. But the more data you moved, the more of an electrical signal strength it required. And the FCC had rules about the maximum amount of electrical strength you could push over it. And that really held modems and the old style communications to about 53 kilobits per second. Now, you could get modems that were 56K, right? 56K modems were really, really common, but about 53K was the tops. And while you were talking, Ronnie, I looked it up, and Earthlink, Net Zero, they both still have
nice.
$12, $15 a month. You can get dial-up service, but it'll be at a blazing fast 53 kilobits if you're lucky, because FCC rules state that phone lines only have to be enough quality to carry 9,600 bits per second, or 9.6K. That is not a lot. A single Word document will be bigger than that.
It's amazing, Don, that this technology is still around, but it is used even in businesses, right? So, Don, I think you were telling me that in the business that you had also worked for, that you still kept that up because it's one of the services that's reestablished immediately after things like emergencies.
Sure. I worked for an insurance company, and if a hurricane blew through, you could pretty much guarantee internet access would be out. Well, for the emergency engineers that respond to a disaster like that, getting telephone service up and running is one of their priorities right after hospitals. So they get hospitals up, then they get phone lines up, and they move on from there. So we needed our agents to be able to get out there and issue insurance checks and get people back on their feet. So we maintained dial-up. They could go out and meet with all the insured, go back to a hotel room, dial up to our system. And it was slow, and it was not the system you wanted to use, but when it was the only option, it all of a sudden became very valuable.
Yeah, Don, this technology does seem valuable in that situation, especially if it's as quickly up as, or faster than anything else that comes up. But Don, this is not our only connection that is available. You'll still see people, it's hard to believe that will still use it, but I do know a few people that would probably still take advantage of it just because they're like, I'm not upgrading anything, and they still have the old technology, and they're willing to do so. But even most computers today, they don't come with the modem that's built into them anymore. It used to be fairly, regular when you actually bought a PC, and there was actually a little telephone jack on the back of it, and you could connect in, but not as much anymore.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I had a computer with a modem in it. And that kind of defines really that whole technology, is that for most of us, it's a last option. Right. It's not a first option or even a middle one. It's an absolute last. We don't want to use dial-up if we can avoid it. In fact, a whole industry has emerged around not using dial-up. Right. And that's the term Ron used earlier, which is broadband. And broadband simply means any technology faster than dial-up, which is not hard to achieve. And that's why we have so many options that are available. So, Ronnie, let's start taking a look at that broadband world. What are some of our options there?
Yeah, one of the options that really did, I guess, kind of jump away from dial-up, but still use kind of the same system, was going to be something that we call DSL, or Digital Subscriber Line. So let's take a look at that option too. So I went ahead and also created a diagram. Now, this does still use some of that existing infrastructure that we talk about, right? The ability to use the same type of connections and signals that we have. But it is a telephone line connection that allows us to connect out to the equipment of that telephone company. But this line, though, you have to only run it a certain amount of distance to be able to do so. And you also call the phone company up, and they're saying, all right, you want this line? It's going to be able to carry data as well. And as long as you're within this distance of this line, you will still get a connection that you'll be able to have, which is nice. Now, when we talk about greater than 56K, it can be upwards probably about 7 or 8 megabits at this point. Now, earlier in our episodes, we've even talked about the idea here of how much that actually means, right? Millions or hundreds of millions of bits per second when you start seeing that. But overall, though, just realize that you have this. Now, the neat thing about this one, though, is that not only are we actually able to, unlike the dial-up where we only can do either voice or actually the data, so you either have the connection one or the other, you can't do both. This one allows you to do both, which is very nice because it allows you to split that up. And from there, you have something here where you get that dual outlet connector, and then you can plug in your telephone and also, of course, plug in this connector to what we call our DSL modem. So this line will be that regular RJ11 connector that will plug into the back here. From that point on, that little modem that we have that translates that then will allow us to connect into our computer, where we'll have that other connection on the other side. Now, you might be wondering, like, okay, so now I have voice and data on the same line. Well, what does that actually mean when it connects out to the other end? In other words, how do I get connected to the internet? Well, over on the other end, when you connect out to their devices, well, the telephone company will have something, we tend to call it a DSLAM, is what we call it, right? A DSL access multiplexer is what this one actually does for us. It will take the voice signal and send it on to the publicly switched telephone network, which of course will then send it to your telephone company. But then if you're on the computer and you're trying to send your data out, it will instead switch that and send that down to the data connector, which will of course provide a connection out to the internet as well. Now, these have also come in different flavors over time. So you might not see the term just DSL. You might hear the term ADSL a lot when you start seeing this. But they have them where they can kind of rate and give you a tiered service of speed too.
Yeah, there's a ADSL, SDSL, XDSL. I mean, there's several different ones, and it really is just a variation of speed. And I remember when DSL first came out, and I was so excited to be able to get something beyond, what was 53,000 bits per second is what we were doing before on a best case scenario. These, I mean, in the beginning, you'd at least get 1 megabit, so 1 million bits per second compared to 53,000. That's a huge difference. today it's really common to get 10, 20 megabit DSL. But Ronnie, you mentioned something earlier about distance,
Right.
that you can push sound over a phone line for miles and miles and miles. But when it comes to pushing digital data, we have a limitation, and that limitation applies to DSL as well, right?
Yeah.
So,
And that limitation, right, is what I set up here, right about 18,000 feet. Now, that also means other customers can connect to this line. The closer you are to this DSLAM, the better your connection speed is going to get. If you're right at the end, and because this is just a little bit under or a little bit over 3.5 miles, if I remember correctly, if you're right there at the end, your connection speeds may vary a lot from the guy that's sitting right there.
and that's why when you want DSL service, just because you have a phone line in your house is not a guarantee. And you can go to the website, and they usually have, like on AT&T or whoever, where you type in your address and they tell you whether you qualify. Well, when they say qualify, they're talking about the distance between you and the nearest DSLAM. They usually have more than one DSLAM. They have community ones that are spread out, and what your distance is. And Ronnie is a perfect example of this, because you have a neighbor with DSL, right?
I do. I have a neighbor right across the street with DSL connection, and I can't get it.
And it's just a matter of 30 yards, maybe?
Yeah, and maybe 30, 50 yards, and you might be going, why not? You're close enough to do so. Well, it's the way that the service provider lines work. So they're with a different telephone company than I am. I can't get to jump onto their particular connection because I don't qualify for their service because I'm in a different service area.
Yep. So that is a big problem with DSL. Unlike dial-up, where if you had a phone line, you could do dial-up, with DSL, it is all about where that nearest DSLAM is, and if you're too far away, it's just not going to happen. Also, if you're at the edge, like Ronnie said, you might only qualify for 1 megabit service and not 20 megabit service, and that's a pretty big difference there too. With 1 megabit, you can browse the web pretty fast, but streaming videos or streaming more than one video at the same time, that's not going to work out. Versus a 20 meg connection where you could probably stream 3 or 4 videos at a time and be just fine. So all stuff we have to consider in the DSL world.
All right, so Don, now that we've kind of talked about the two that probably, again, one branched off of the other fairly easily, let's talk about, well, how do we fix some of these limitations that we have? Well, of course, in America, we decided, hey, let's make it available to everyone that we possibly can. And what we can do from there is go into space, okay, is what we decided to do. So when we start talking about this, yes, if you heard about satellite internet connection, well, this is available to just about everyone that's out there. It doesn't mean that you have to do it, but it's an option that is available to you. And this connection is a little bit different in this sense, right? That there's a part of it that still is the same. We have a satellite modem internally, but then that means your provider is going to provide this pole as well as a satellite dish, and that's technically called a VSAT here, right? A very small aperture dish. And of course, that's pointed to a satellite somewhere in space. So that means there's a great distance that's here before you get over to your internet service connection. Now, the advantage of this is it's everywhere that you can possibly think of, at least here in the United States. It's just about everywhere that you can think of. And as long as you can see the southern sky, you can get access to this connection. And you might be wondering, like, why in the United States if you can see the southern sky? That's because those satellites are in what we call geosynchronous orbit, and that means the satellites are over the equator. That's what that means. So that's why, for most of us in the United States, we're in the northern hemisphere, so as long as we can see the southern sky, we can generally point to that. But it still means we're bouncing the signal, though, into space before we're actually getting to a web page, Don. That's a lot of distance to have to go across.
All right, and if we think about like the speed of light, right? The speed of light is 186,000 miles per second, and that's pretty darn fast, right? But when Ronnie talks about a satellite there, that satellite is over 22,000 miles away in space. And so you're traveling up 22,000 miles and then coming back down 22,000 miles to get to the destination. Well, guess what the destination is going to do? It's going to reply back. If I'm going to the CNN website, I'm saying, please give me a copy of CNN. 22,000 miles up, 22,000 miles down. CNN gets my message and responds back. 22,000 miles up, 22,000 miles down. That means that while I do get internet access, and it's probably a high bandwidth, I don't know what your bandwidth is, Ronnie.
Yeah, it's about 10
megabit. Yeah. So decent bandwidth like DSL, because it's got to travel ultimately 88,000 miles from end to end, back and forth. That's a pretty, like, the speed of light's 186,000 miles. We think of that as a huge number, but all of a sudden we're creeping up on that number. Right. It creates latency. It creates where it feels like, even though it's high bandwidth, that it's very slow.
Yeah, and the kind of disadvantage of this, right, is weather is kind of the big one. If it blocks something, a bird sitting on that dish right there, it will do it. I can guarantee that one because I've seen that one happen. But overall, though, the other thing, of course, is that when you take a look at it, most of these will have what they call a fair usage policy, which means here's what they say that you can use per month. So you'll have so much that you can download, and then after that point, they will essentially limit you to your connection speed that you can. And that really comes down even below something like DSL, all the way very close to the fact of even dial-up connection speeds.
That's something we haven't talked about yet, is that sometimes you get unlimited usage of your lines, but a lot of times these are what are called metered connections. So when you sign up for it, and this goes across the board today, dial-up had it, DSL, cable. I know I have a fiber connection. We'll talk about fiber later, where I've got a pretty high limit, like a terabyte limit, where you can transfer that amount of data per month. And as soon as you hit that limit, a few different things could happen. You might get billed more. They might slow down or throttle your connection. They might cut you off entirely. Back in the dial-up day, they would just cut you off entirely, and that was that. So, it does depend on the carrier. Do you have a limit like that with your satellite?
I do, but it's actually a lot better than it was. So as we upgraded the plan, they actually let us do it a lot more. And I think it's around 50 gigs, if I remember right. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but in dial-up, by comparison, my first plan, it was like 12 gigs. And that was for the entire month. So this one, though, it gives me 50 gigs, and I know exactly what's happening because at the end of that month, they start sending you like, here's a warning, you're close to your speed. So at the beginning, when I first did it, there wasn't anything. It was just like, okay, you're over. And that was it. That's when you got a message from them as, you're done, you're over. And you're like, oh, okay, well, there we go. And if you had done that in 2 weeks, well, the rest of your month was kind of done. Yeah.
And I don't want to paint the picture that like satellite is not any good because it is. It brings internet access to people who don't have it. And when you think about a lot of the things that we do, like if I'm watching a movie, well, when you hit play, sure, it might take 2 extra seconds to start playing that movie. It's 2 seconds is noticeable, right? But once the movie plays, you don't realize you're 2 seconds behind, and the movie just plays right through. So you get a normal experience. But that latency is pretty significant. And so if you're like a video gamer, right? That can be pretty tragic. Satellite's not really good for that. But for email, browsing the web, watching movies, it's not something that we notice. So just another option. Now, that's not the only set of options that we have, but they're probably the most accessible, right? DSL hits a lot of people. Satellite hits darn near everybody. But there are some other ones that are not as widespread.
Yeah, they're not as widespread, but they're starting to get fairly widespread. So like the idea of cable internet access, that's starting to get to the point where they're saying like it's in 80% of the households here in America. So 80%, even though that's not the most widespread, not compared to what we can do with satellite and even the regular dial-up or some type of telephone connection, it is still fairly widespread at this point. And the neat thing about these, of course, is that they work in the fairly similar fashion here. If you have a bundled connection, that means they're going to give you cable TV and your internet connection at one point. You'll actually be able to get something like that all together, and they'll provide that for you as well. And that also means that you're getting that, whatever show that you're watching on cable TV, as well as your internet connection. And it still does rely on a modem here at this end to help you to get that connection that you need for your data connection. But then, of course, you may have a cable box on the other end, too, that you have to be able to do. So when you connect that all together, that, again, is the service provider, the cable company saying, we need to put equipment into your home, and here's how it's going to go. And they'll go ahead and they'll get all that set up for you. And you will then connect out to, well, what they end up calling over here on their end, right? What they call a cable head end. Okay? It's essentially, it combines things together on our end, and then it's here, it can split it off. If you're taking your cable TV, it'll split it off to your cable TV feeds inside of the cable company. And then from that point, you also have your CMTS, cable modem terminal server, is what that also does for you. That gives you access then to the internet provider that they're actually providing through as well. So if you take a look at it, it's fairly similar to the way that the DSL works, but this time we're actually getting much more bandwidth in its connection to be able to do. But a lot more people will also be able to use this connection too. So when you start to take a look at this type of connection, you'll see cable run to entire neighborhoods or to an entire apartment building, and that's where it kind of has problems, right? The more people that are on it at one time, well, the less speed that you're going to get because of that. So it might be early in the morning, you get great speeds, but if you're home at 7 o'clock at night and everybody in that apartment building is running Netflix, it might slow down just a tad bit for you. But when everybody's just kind of nice and even, you'll probably feel like it's the fastest connection you'll ever have.
Yeah, and I always thought it was interesting because if you take a glance at the diagram, it looks like DSL, right? It really looks like the same topology. But because most digital most cable communications are digital already, we're really just stacking additional digital data on there. And the cable companies build repeaters all throughout the town to keep the signal strength high. So we don't have the distance limitation that you have with DSL. With DSL, we care about distance. We had to be under 3.5 miles away from the DSLAM to get even a mediocre speed, right? The further away you were, the slower the speed was. With cable, you don't have that, right? So if you're 5 miles, 10 miles, 50 miles away, they've done repeaters because they've got to keep the video quality up for their existing signals anyway. And so that same system powers the data. So in most towns, this is not a guarantee, but in most towns, your cable internet access will usually be double the speed of DSL, and everyone gets offered the same speed packages because distance doesn't come into play. So for most people, and even me for years, like I swore by cable broadband versus DSL. I would take DSL if I had to, but cable was always preferential for me because you got more reliable access, even with the community stuff in mind, right? Like if you always knew when the kids got out of school because your connections would get a little slower, but it was still usually a higher speed than DSL.
Yeah, no doubt, Don, that this is one of the big ones that's out there. So there's another one that's been coming on the scene recently as well, which is one just called fixed wireless. Now, when we start taking a look at the idea of fixed wireless here, this one, it works just like what you would think that your wireless signal would do, but you're seeing this from providers that are also offering like your cell phone coverage, and even your telephone providers like AT&T, they're offering this where they come into your home, and what they'll also do is they'll provide for you an external antenna, but you're just connecting to one of their towers as well, okay? So this one, they have to point it directly at that tower to make, I'm assuming, a point-to-point type of connection for you to do so. Then that wireless or that external antenna will then connect to a wireless router, and internally, you can, of course, then wire in if you need to, or if you're using wireless, depending on the device, it doesn't really matter. You'll also be able to connect in and use this instead. So the difference here is we're not actually now cabled directly to like the DSLAM, okay, or we're not cabled in directly to that cable head end at some point. We are now using that wireless signal technology to give us the connection that we need, and then the provider itself is going to help us to connect out to the internet. So this one, the only real limitation here is approximately 10 miles. Most of the providers today that are doing this, especially in rural areas, they're saying there's no limitation in terms of a metered connection. They're saying you'll have it all that you want, but when you take a look at it, they'll also say, well, the more people that are on this, the less your connection speeds are going to get. So they're not going to guarantee you that you'll get the fastest connection in the world, but they'll say it is unlimited in that sense.
The other limitation that we have to worry about when we get this, kind of similar to satellite, is that you have to have line of sight, right? With the satellite, it's pointing up. The satellites are in space. But here, you're actually pointing to a tower that's on the land. And that tower isn't going to be any more than like 1 mile tall. That is really rare for a tower to even be that tall. So it's very easy for trees to block your line of sight. And then maybe trees in a neighbor's yard or a nearby building. There might be a skyscraper. Those are all things that interfere with this. So this is not very widespread, but it is an option in some places. We film here in Gainesville, Florida. Gainesville has more trees than any other city in Florida. So this service is practically non-existent here. But in other cities, it is pretty relevant. Now, there are a few more technologies we're going to talk about. Ronnie, we've only got a couple more to tackle. You want to just run a little long on this one?
Let's go ahead and do that, and that way we'll cover it up, and we'll make sure that we get good coverage on it, but not have to extend to another episode as well, okay? All right, so let's talk about our next one that we also want to get into, which is going to be, the idea here of, fiber optic connection as well, okay? So now this is I would say this is probably the newest of the ones that we've talked about, and that's because for a long time, fiber was kind of this mystery, but since it's starting to get run just about everywhere, especially in metropolitan areas and anywhere that there's streets, you're seeing this more and more. And that means direct fiber connections in two different ways that will provide for you that same type of connection, but even more. Now, this one is probably the fastest connection that you'll get. You'll get the most bandwidth. You'll get everything that you ever wanted out of your internet connection to be able to get access to as well. Okay. Now, when you start to do this, as you call the company that provides this, there's probably one of two types of services it provides. And I wanted to make sure I pointed out these here. Fiber to the home, that means it directly runs a fiber optic cable from their provider to you up in this point that they call that ONT. For us, I guess we could call it a fiber optic modem, I guess, is what we could call it. So it runs directly here. And then from that point, of course, you would then connect that maybe to a wireless router if you had that. And then you could connect wired as well as wireless, and then you're fine and you'd be ready to go. The other one that is also more popular, but I think this one's more proprietary because they don't spell fiber in the same way. They spell it Fibre. Now, you might go, well, that's the way that the British spell it. That's fine. But I think this is a proprietary technology, if I remember right. And this one doesn't run it directly to the home. It runs it essentially to a box or a big metal case that's probably on your street corner or somewhere in a centralized community neighborhood. And then from there, you might see cable or you might see, some type of copper line that comes into your home. So those are the two types, but it's fairly similar here. Now, I wanted to show you this. I have a couple of pictures here. You'll see that here's essentially what looks like a modem. Now, all the modems that we talk about really do a couple of things, right? It takes that one signal. So whether we're talking about the cable, which would normally have a coax, a little round one, and you twist it on, and then the connector on the other end is normally this RJ45 connector here. Well, here on this one, right? This one has the fiber optic cable over here on the left that connects in, and it takes those light impulses and changes them to electrical signal and allows it to go out through, of course, this connector out to your switch or to your computer if you directly plugged it in there to be able to do that, okay? And same thing, as you send signal back, it will do the same thing here. This one even has a one for a voice connection over here too. So that is the same as that device I showed you, the ONT, is what we see. Okay, so if you're running fiber to the home, you'll probably see something like this, there. And if you're running that fiber to the node, you might find something like this instead. And that's where that fiber optic company that's decided to do this, they'll run it here, and then they'll have, they'll actually be able to provide that connection. But on your end, in connecting to it, it might be the cable TV company. It might be whatever company says, oh, no, we'll connect the rest of this. But yes, you're going to be at least up in that point. So this is beginning to be fairly popular as well. Both of those are two good fiber optic technologies.
Yeah, and you mentioned speed. That it is really one of the biggest differences of fiber. So for example, we were talking about cable, and I said with cable, you can get connections like in the 50 megabit range pretty easy. Some are doing 100 megabit now. I moved about 8 months ago into a home that was, we actually had fiber run in that neighborhood. So I was able to get fiber internet for the first time. And it's gigabit speed.
Nice.
So 1,000 megabit. It's significantly faster. And that's because fiber is transmitting light instead of electricity. Light travels a lot faster, and they can bend light on a number of different frequencies to get more connections on a single strand of fiber than they can off of cable. So it is much faster with much more bandwidth, much more room for customers in there. And so this is a technology we're seeing rolled out more and more. But one problem with it is they actually do have to come and bury cable to your home. It's expensive cable. Right. That process is not something where they're going to be going back and retrofitting a lot of apartment complexes. If they weren't rigged for fiber already, then they're usually just out of luck. So we'll have to see how time goes on this one, whether we get fiber everywhere. But one technology that really is creeping up is the last one that we're going to talk about. That actually is one of the first ones you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, which was cellular data. And I think everyone uses this one form or another these days and is quickly overtaking a lot of the other types of data connectivity.
It really is. When I said also that most people are dropping off their landline, I probably didn't say that, but there's a lot of people today that don't even have landlines anymore. So
I'm one of those.
Yeah. So if you don't have a landline, well, now the idea of taking advantage of DSL or dial-up is not going to happen. But everybody is taking advantage, of course, of their cellular connection that they tend to have off of their cell phone plan, right, from whatever provider that you have. And the most popular technology today is a cellular 4G LTE, long-term evolution is what that one stands for. And 4G, of course, is the fourth generation of this technology. And the neat thing about this, it's completely wireless, which is nice. Now, you might say, didn't we just talk about fixed wireless? Well, notice this one, what's actually missing in this particular one is that I don't have an external antenna that needs to connect to this tower. The other thing is I don't have to be in that one fixed location. I can, okay? We can be on laptops that might have a 4G, what do you call it? Hotspot. I couldn't remember what it was called, a hotspot. And you can also, of course, have your own cell phone that will also do that as well. And you're connecting directly to the tower off of those individual devices. Your car may even be connected. Now, Donna, is your car connected this way as well?
Mine isn't. My wife's is.
Oh, okay.
She has where it basically becomes a hotspot in the car, and you can give internet access to the kids.
Yeah.
We don't use it; it's too expensive, but it does have it.
So it's amazing that even cars today, right? And this means that we're able to stay mobily connected, right? So I don't have to be in one location. I can continue to move around and still remain connected here to be able to do so. Now, you do have to be around a tower, at least in some distance around a good service area to be able to provide that. But this is the one, as you go to 4G, it provides for you the best, in theory, coverage area, as well as the best possible speeds and connection. Once you get down to 3G, especially in today's networks and smartphones today, it gets a little bit more sketchy. Can you connect? Maybe, but you can't really get it reliably a lot of times anymore. So as long as you're within the range of these towers, you're fine. And wherever your service provider is, and that's kind of the big limitation too. Not every service provider goes into every single area. So, if you end up getting out of that service area, you might find that it says you're connected, but you have a little E that tells you you're on the edge network, which means you're on somebody else's network, and you might not get all the service that you need to. But this one is by far probably the fast approach, if not the most popular technology today. As many cell phones as I see, I'd kind of venture to guess it's probably most popular.
Yeah, and there are a lot of variations. You mentioned the E for edge. That's right. Actually the 3G data technology. 3G, okay. And then in 4G, we have LTE. 5G, they're coming up with all sorts of crazy names for it. They haven't decided yet. But there's big speed differences, right? If you see that edge, if you're on a 3G connection like that, you're usually getting 128K, less than a megabit, somewhere in that range. When you get into the 4G LTE, it can be significantly higher. In testing, they show where it can even do like 200 megabit. Nobody gets that, but it could. With 5G, they're striving to get up to a gigabit. They're trying to get really, really high speed connections over that cellular. But keep in mind that these cellular connections are almost always metered connections. You have limited bandwidth available. And with these guys, they don't cut you off when you hit the limit. They usually just start charging a lot of money extra. Ronnie, have you ever run over your cell data plan?
I have run over it one time, and I was very surprised because they let me know I was over. But when I actually went over, it was only by like 500 megabytes or something, so not even close to a gig. They charged me for the next 10 gigs. Wow. They did. So I was like, are you joking?
Expensive.
It was amazing how much they charged me for.
And the companies that offer unlimited plans, what they normally do is give you a certain amount of bandwidth each month, and when you exceed it, they then throttle you and slow your connection down. So it might not be a connection that you want to rely on for your everyday communications, but that's changing, right. And this technology is constantly evolving. So who knows? 10 years from now, when we film the same series again, it might be everybody's on a 6G wireless network, and that's that. But these are all different things that you might see out there as far as internet connectivity in the world.
All right, Don. Well, that's pretty much all of the major ones that I know about. So, Don, as most people are going to, these are probably the ones that they're going to encounter out there.
Absolutely. And there are some fringe ones that are out there, ones that you may encounter that we cover. For those of you that go on to do Network Plus, you'll learn about Metro Ethernet and a few other ones that are out there, dark fiber connections and all that good stuff. But as far as general broadband and internet connectivity, those are the ones that you're going to see out there in the real world. Well, Ronnie, thank you for running through all of that with us. Everybody got a great example of dial-up, DSL, cable, fiber, wireless, cellular wireless, and who did I leave off? Satellite. So just a good example of what's out there, all ones that you want to be familiarized with. And like I said, if you want to learn more about networking, really the Network Plus series is great. It goes in depth into how all of these work and how to configure them. Speaking of configuration, we had a chance to see how to set up a local wireless. Setting up a lot of these other ones, really not much different. So it's all really fun in the networking world. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But as far as this episode is concerned, we're going to go ahead and sign off right here. So signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Don Pizzette.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we will see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.